Hi, I'm Greg Watson. Welcome along to this discussion on how to select good tenants for your rental property. This is being recorded on a social media platform called Blab, which allows people to type comments as I'm talking or to actually join in face-to-face to ask questions. So you may notice as we talk, occasionally I may respond to people. If you're watching this video later, that might seem a bit strange. Any links that I refer to in this video, I'll simply put in the description or chat wherever it is reposted. So thanks for watching and listening. How to select good tenants for your rental property. The first step that we tend to look at is how to attract the best tenants to your rental property. So even before the actual literal selection process, you are thinking, what are the sort of people I want to attract and how do I go about attracting them? If you have a nice property, then you want to look at large employers in the area. Welcome along, Jonathan. Thanks for joining us. And we're talking about how to select good tenants for your rental property. I am just initially saying that you go back a step and think, how can I target the right people in my marketing that I want to rent my home or rent my property? One way that we find is to target particular areas, in other words, large employers, particular workplaces. In New Zealand and in the Manawatu area where I live, examples would be the large hospital that does a whole range of background checks on their employees. You know that if you find a tenant through that sort of source, then they've already had background checks done. And this helps reduce your risk and get people with good jobs. As well as that, you can send details to recruitment agencies who are bringing people into the region and just other large employers. Here we have a university, so we can target the staff. We have science institutes of research scientists, so we can target those areas as well. So what you're doing is you're reducing your risk by trying to get people that have a certain type of job. So how do you reflect this in your marketing? You can directly send them links to a listing or details to the workplaces or to an administrator to forward on. As well as that, you can make sure that your advertising really does reflect or will appeal to the people that you really want to have in the property. So if you're wanting to attract professional people, the marketing should look professional and should appeal to their tastes or needs. For example, busy professional people might be interested in having things like properties where the grounds and gardens are maintained for them, rather than having to do it themselves, or that offer extra services such as the ability to have a cleaner and so forth. The advertising itself, you want to have photos preferably professionally taken, and bearing in mind that if you have an investment property, it is worth the investment to have professional photos that you can use on an ongoing basis. If you have any questions, feel free just to type them or join in the chat. So if your advertising or marketing is directly to the sources that will increase the chances of getting good tenants, plus it looks really professional and will appeal to those people, you're a long way there. If you live in an area where there's people moving into the area, another great strategy for around selecting good tenants is to use video marketing. Now, all smartphones have a video feature, of course, and many of them you can find wide-angle lenses. For example, this is an Olo clip, which allows you to film wide-angle or take wide-angle photos of the property. The reason that video is so good in attracting a better type of tenant is that if there are professional people looking to transfer into your area, then they can make 80% at least of their decision to rent based on the video alone. So we're actually talking a little bit about finding the right people and essentially starting that selection process by narrowing out the good from the bad to a certain extent. Now, when it comes to showing people through the property, It depends if you are going to do that yourself or if you have a property manager. But whoever is actually showing that person the property, if they're doing a physical viewing of the property, there are some really good questions to ask which come across in a conversational manner, which help you to select or to form an opinion on those tenants. So my staff are all trained to ask certain questions. Examples would be just to casually find out a little bit more about their situation. How many people will be living in the house? If they have pets or not, children or not, to find out what's important to them and to observe how they treat each other, how they talk to each other. And it is actually, in this country, you cannot discriminate when deciding on selecting tenants, but you can certainly form a gut feeling for what they're like based on how they answer certain questions, how they dress, or how they act. Particularly when comparing groups of tenants, and when we work with hundreds of groups of tenants, you can form quite a good impression on how people are acting. Thanks for joining, Dave. Nice to see you. I was just talking about questions that we ask tenants at the rental property. Now, it's a good idea then, once you've shown the tenants the property, that you've actually got a really good application form. So a form that they fill out details that have got really important information, such as their personal details, their name, address, phone, email, things like passport or driver's license numbers. If you're in a country where they have something like the National Health Service in the UK, or a national identity number as they do in a number of European countries, or if you're somewhere like New Zealand where you can ask for something like an IRD number, it just gives you extra information, not only to do background checks, but also to ensure that if things go badly in the property, you're able to find those tenants again. One thing that works well is to make sure that you have more than one address for service. Now, an address for service is something where court documents can get sent if things do go bad with your rental property. So there may be slightly different terminology from country to country, but it's an address in which a court would recognise that that correspondence will make it to the tenant. So it could be a next of kin or so forth. So the application form, there are some really good templates online. What I would suggest is that whatever your local tenancy service is, and in New Zealand it's the Ministry of Business, Innovation and Employment, what used to be called the Department of Building and Housing, they have forms there which are pretty good. If you'd like to look at our application form, you're able to do so. I've put a link to our website, whatsinrealestate.nz. Simply find one of our properties for rent, click apply, and you can see the application form that we use. It's a very robust application form, at least in New Zealand. So the reason for gathering all this information is to do the background checks. Now, research has shown in New Zealand a couple of statistics that you might find quite interesting. Firstly, about 70% of investment property owners look after their own properties themselves. They don't actually employ a management company. Of those 70% of people, about 75% of those choose tenants simply based on little more than a handshake and a face-to-face meeting. So it's pretty scary statistics, and you really need to delve deeper than that to protect yourselves. We're talking about a big investment that these people are renting from you. So what other checks are available? There's a whole bunch of free checks. There are some which you have to pay for, and there are some that will just take a little bit of your time. So let's talk about things that you can generally look at online when researching whether a tenant's likely to be a suitable tenant. I'll talk about what we can do in New Zealand, and then there's the possibility to investigate further based on where you're watching this from. The first that we do is we look at the website in New Zealand, which I will type in the chat, so just bear with me a moment. And that's called tenancy.nz. Now, what this is an actual database of court rulings through the Tenancy Tribunal. It's possible that where you live, for example, if you're in Australia, they will have something similar. It's just has a different name, of course. What you can do on that website is enter the details of the tenant, provided you've got their date of birth, and it will search to see if there are any tenancy-related court rulings against them. So we do that one, it's a must, because not only do you know if there are rulings against them, but you know exactly what the nature of those rulings are. You can see the actual ruling, for example, if they stopped paying rent or caused intentional damage. So that's a good one because it's free. Other ones that are free, of course, and Dave, who's watching, could probably relate, are that you can check social media if you choose to. You can look them up on Facebook or Google Plus and so forth, just to get a bit of a feel for what they're like. A lot of people have public profiles, and while it may show a slightly unrealistic impression of their life, it's worth having a look if you're in the private sector because it's free. Another place to look is to do credit checks and online credit checks. Now, these are available. They are available to the public. Thanks, Dave. Dave's made a comment that it can be useful building the full picture around social. Look at the social media. Are there things they're not telling you? If there's a whole lot of pictures of wild parties and rented properties, cars doing burnouts, gang members, etc., well then, they might be painting a different picture when they come to see your property. So another place that's good is credit or financial background checks. Now, these aren't available to everybody in New Zealand. They're available to members of the Property Investors Federation, professional property management companies like my own, and so forth. Now, the benefits of doing this, and I'm going to put another link in the chat, is one that we use, and I'm going to put two links because one will be correct and one will be incorrect, but it's a company called TINS. Oops, sorry, I beg your pardon. That second one should read tinz.net.nz. Just put that there. This is for people in New Zealand, and this is an example of you can have a look at the website even if you're watching from elsewhere, but this is a example of a company where you can pay to do a search. And thank you, Dave's put in the chat, the correct one is tinz.net.nz. Thanks for your help there. And what this allows you to do is to pay a fee to do a credit check. Some companies bring in extra services. For example, when you use that particular site in New Zealand, you not only get a credit check, it also checks the driver's license details to make sure that that's okay, court rulings, and so forth. So there are a number of things available. If you are able to spot in their credit or financial history that there have been some hiccups with regards payments or debt, then that is a clue, certainly, that things could go potentially bad in the tenancy. But any of these things I'm talking about individually may not necessarily be enough to deny a tenant. So the tenancy, previous court ruling, credit and financial history. Certainly big warning signs, though. So how else to select good tenants? I mentioned a driver's license check. Certainly take a photocopy or a photo on your phone of their driver's license or passport, so you've got that as a record. The main reason for that is that some websites require you to put those details in before you can do things like credit checks and background checks. There's also, in some areas, there are online tenant and landlord reference databases. So that's something that you could look into as well via a Google search, and that is the TINS link I've put in there is an example of one of those where tenants, landlords can rate tenants, and that can be another port of call. So that's a couple of the paid things to do with the credit and financial background checks. Now, if you don't have access to those, there's probably a couple of categories of potential tenant that are going to rent your property. There are those who currently own their own home and they're wanting to rent a property from you. In other words, they've moved from out of town or overseas. And there are people who have been renting previously. The background checks that you can do actually vary depending on the circumstance. one thing that you can do is with regards to people that own their own home, you can ask them to provide you with evidence of mortgage payments if they're happy to do so. The reason for this is because it shows a history of making repayments, and if you found out a little bit more about their situation, for example, if they were then renting their house out, you can be confident that those payments of rent to you will continue. If it's a tenant that's been previously renting from somebody else, then you'd want to take details of not only their current landlord, but also the previous one. The current landlord's details are really important because obviously you can look at their current performance with regards to things like how they're keeping the condition of the property and whether they're currently paying their rent. But why would you take the details of the landlord before the current landlord? Surely that's not so relevant. Well, actually it is, in that the previous landlord has done, in other words, not the current landlord, but the previous landlord has done a final inspection of the property when those tenants moved out. The current landlord hasn't, of course. So this is actually really important to find out things from that landlord about how they left the property, was there any damage that needed to be repaired, and so forth. So therefore, don't just talk to the current landlord, but try to go back too. And just to recap, if they haven't been renting and they own their own property, feel free to ask them to view copies of bank statements that show regularity of payments of the mortgage. So feel free to pop any questions in there too. Now, that's actually not all the checks you should do. And as you can tell, this is quite a time-consuming process. And in my company at Watson Real Estate, the link's in the chat, we have people that are doing these checks all of the time. If you're in the private sector, obviously it can be quite onerous. And I think that's why, as I mentioned earlier, about 75% of privately managed properties, the owners simply just do not do many of these checks. Remember earlier I was talking about showing people around a house and some of the questions that you can ask them to try and get a feel for the type of people that they are. One question I would hope that you may have asked them was why they were moving to the area and what employment they had. It's easy to ask this in a conversational way. Just simply say, so you're moving to Palmerston North, what line of work are you in? Have you got a job here? These sorts of things. It's just conversational. People tell you, yes, they'll be working at the hospital as a registrar and they start in 2 weeks' time. So immediately in your mind, you're knowing the risk is reducing because the hospital does some really good background checks as well. But as well as that, you put on your application form the details of their employer. Now, questions to ask an employer can be things like, tell us how you found this employee, in other words, how you found your way to them. Why did you, if they're currently employed there, then you can ask about things like how they do their job or what they do well, those sorts of things. You can always ask the questions that the people don't have to answer, of course. But as well as that, you just want to confirm that they are actually employed where they say they are. Because the problem with written references are that although they are good and that they do have their place, they should always be accompanied and backed up by a phone call. You see, a tenant's best friend could write a reference pretending to be the current landlord. So that's why you need to have the current landlord's phone number so you can make contact and just check. I've had 19 years experience in property management. Believe me, I've seen it all. And so the purpose today is to help you try to reduce risk and select good tenants. So you've checked with their employer. Now it's also good on the application form to have business and personal references. That is, where possible, people from the business community and people to give personal references. Now, why is this relevant? Because all of these things simply add up to say if we're getting positive answers to all of these things, it's almost like ticking boxes and the risk is reducing for you all of the time. It just really helps you to select good tenants. So business references, just talking to those, finding out who the people are and why they can refer them, what experience they've had with them, and likewise personal experience. You do need to take these with a grain of salt, potentially, personal references in particular. However, when added into the overall picture with things like the court rulings, the credit and financial background check, and investigations you've done yourself, then it just does add up to a picture where you can feel more confident. And it's certainly what we do at my company before even putting a tenant forward to the owner of the property. So we have between 8 and 10 background checks that we do. And that really helps us to make sure that that risk is reducing all the time. So that's a little bit about how to select good tenants. And just to recap, start with marketing and directly targeting areas that employ people of a standard that you feel is appropriate and suitable for your rental property. And target your marketing through things like videos and professionally taken photos to ensure that you're going to be attracting the right sort of people. And don't get me wrong, you'll attract a range of people, but if the marketing is very good and thorough, you'll have plenty of people to choose from in most marketplaces. I mentioned about meeting people at the property, showing them around and asking a whole bunch of questions to learn more about their situation. Just do so in a conversational way. And one thing that property managers know, but the general public probably do not, is that when you're showing people around a property, you can have a nagging gut feel, just something in the back of your mind or in your stomach that doesn't quite feel right about the people you're showing. My experience tells me, and the experience of my staff, that you should listen to that. It's a big investment that you're putting your future residents into, and it's important that you take the time and find the right people. I then talked about a range of things to have on an application form and suggested that within your market you might like to find a standard form, and that one's available on our website simply by going to one of our properties, clicking on Apply Now, and that form will be available to you to look at and to adapt if you want to your marketplace. So in the absence of no questions, we might finish up there. And don't forget, just one thing I want to mention before I go, and I wouldn't be doing my job properly and giving some advice today if I didn't. That's that selection of tenants is only the first part of reducing risk. The second part is what you do during the tenancy to reduce risk, which I'll talk about another day. And the third part is about specialist insurance, which means that even if you did the extremely thorough selection process, there could be a very small chance that something goes wrong. And if something goes wrong, you need to be covered. Sometimes it can go badly wrong. Thanks very much for watching today. I hope you've enjoyed. And if you need any advice or help, feel free to get in touch. Thanks for watching.